trying to figure out exactly what it is that Brexiteers actually wanted from Brexit is actually quite something difficult to pin down, because as we've said multiple times, Brexiteers love to talk about trade until Brexit's not about trade, it becomes about immigration, then it's not about immigration, it becomes about sovereignty, and they change the goalposts completely. And now that we've quote-unquote got Brexit done, and as I've said multiple times, Brexit is far from being done, much to the, shall we say, the chagrin of the Brexiteers. Like I say, they cannot keep this idea that Brexit is going well forever. You know, it is a balloon, and they only have so much hot air to try and prove that Brexit works. And one of the big things that they talked about was, of course, trade. Trade was one of the big pillars. Oh, we can go and do these fantastic trade deals. Well, as we've discussed multiple times, these trade deals aren't as necessarily as good as often people think they are. And the fact that, you know, we were in the EU, something which everyone unanimously agreed to until at least 2012, where there was starting to, shall we say, talk about, shall we say, crackdown on tax evasion. But there you go. So this Australian trade deal, one of the big key factors that is going to end up affecting the UK is going to be the fact that we have now offered the Australia tariff-free access for their beef to the UK. This essentially means that other countries are also going to look at that as well and say, can't we also have that? And you won't be surprised that not too long after essentially this was announced, Canada is now also seeking that exact same tariff-free access for their beef products. This is why it is going to be so damaging for the UK agricultural industry. Because it's not just all that cheap Australian beef it's going to come flooding in, it's also the cheap beef that's going to come in flooding in from places like Canada and even the US, where their standards are one of the lowest in the world when it comes to the protection of that we are, shall we say, used to. And again, the Conservatives and the Brexiteers said that, oh, don't worry, we'll protect. And all exactly the same, and I said this already multiple times, the exact same things that Boris Johnson is saying to farmers is the exact same things he was saying to the DUP and saying to the fishermen. So farmers are absolutely next to get thrown under this bus. The whole reason why it's a 15-year de-escalation of tariffs is purely for the fact that Boris Johnson can say, well, look, we've got this fantastic trade deal, and oh, don't worry, we've got 15 years to find a solution to this problem. Well, we were told by the Brexiteers and even the Tories that they had a solution to the Irish border problem. Turns out, still not a solution that they are happy with, even though this is the very deal that they negotiated. So, before we jump into today's article, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you to all the people who do support me that way. So, this comes from The Guardian, and the title is, "The Australian trade deal shows how global Britain has already lost its way." You can tell that British farmers will be betrayed by Boris Johnson by the way the promises to look after them. The Prime Minister has pledged more support for equivalent to the forfeited European subsidies. He says that the sector will be safe from cut price competition when new free trade deals are signed. He also told Marion Bettis, the president of the National Farmers Union, that he would, quote, rather die than hurt her members. Really? Death before cheap beef. Maybe Johnson can actually honour these pledges, but it would be completely out of character. It would also defeat the purpose of Brexit for many Tory MPs to, quote, take back control. Signalling many things to voters, but to Eurosceptic ideologues it meant the liberation from EU's common external tariffs. Having trade policy run from Brussels was proof of Britain's colonialisation by continental bureaucrats. Deals with non-Europeans are the prize for emancipation. That's why Liz Truss, the Trade Secretary, is determined to secure a zero-tariff agreement with Australia in time for the next month's G7 summit in Cornwall. The economic benefits would be marginal, shifting the growth dial by only 0.02% over the next 15 years. But it could be used as a trophy for the global Britain chest is completely priceless. Other ministers, such as Michael Gove and the Cabinet Secretary for the Environmental, George Eustace, fret about the impact on domestic producers, who literally cannot compete against Australian mega farms. Welsh and Scottish rural communities are also especially vulnerable, and ministers worry about the future of the union or put a fresh pot of nationalist grievance on for brewing. Johnson's instincts are with the Libertarians. He promised to farmers are reliable as the assurances that he gave to the ones on businesses in Northern Ireland that Brexit would not erect any kind of barriers to the trade across the Irish Sea. He lied. The Prime Minister likes to be the giver of good news that will satisfy the appetite, also himself and his audience, sooner than serve the unpalpable truth. The deal with Australia will be done. The UK farmers will be told that they have nothing to fear because of current food safety standards, and that it will still apply and tariffs will be phased out gradually. Agriculture will continue in the British countryside, but this scale and character will change over time. Competition will generate new rural businesses and bankruptcies. This is how markets are supposed to work in the free trade Brexit model. As a stimulus to innovation, creative destruction, Tory MPs tend not to phrase it that way to farmers in their constituencies. The Australian deal will be the most consequential in setting expectations for what we might concede when the time comes to do a deal with Washington. That is the holy grail of the post-Brexit deals. Cabinet rows over antipodon livestock are just a rehearsal for a battle that will erupt for when the US demands land on the table. The underlying tension is between the electoral tactics that delivered Brexit and its ideological genesis. Johnson's appeal is pretty rooted in his Euroscepticism as an agenda for deregulation and buccaneering adventure on the high seas of globalisation. His Commons majority was won by appealing to voters whose economic and cultural demands point inwards, a policy of Britain First protectionism. In campaign mode, Johnson managed to package that as one coalition. But government requires choices that ultimately will pull this apart. Such stress are going to be a routine feature of trade politics in the US. Candidates at the state and federal level are steeped in arguments about the consumer benefits of cheap imports and job losses to offshoring. This only feels new to the Westminster because for a generation that action was all in Brussels. If MPs had better understood what was coming their way, they might have fought harder for powers of scrutiny, amendment, and veto of future deals. Congress has vast leverage over a US president in such manners. The European Parliament has more say in EU trade policy than the Commons can contribute to anything that Johnson actually signs. Trade agreements are international treaties, and as such, concluded by a royal prerogative. There is a procedural mechanism by which MPs might, in theory, thwart such ratification. But it has never been tested, and by then it is far too late to change the actual terms of the deal. Brexiteers might call this a restoration of parliamentary sovereignty, but it looks far more like a concentration of quasi-monarchical power in the hands of the Prime Minister. In economic terms, autonomy in trade deals is no compensation for the loss of frictionless access to the EU single market. That exclusion is also a strategic downgrade. Brussels is a place where international standards are set, as is Washington, also increasingly now Beijing. London is not in that club. Lord Frost, the Minister for Brexit's loose ends last week, told a committee of MPs that it was a, quote, oversimplification to carve the world into three ruling market superpowers, and that Britain might also count alongside the US, the EU and China. No veteran of trade wars actually believes him. But it is a story that Brexiteers tell to justify a move that looks historically misjudged and outdated. The Eurosceptic idea of Britain as a global hub of free trade evangelism was conceived in a different era. It is a hybrid of imperial nostalgia and late 20th century market utopianism. It took a generation of Tory acolytes of that cult to actually achieve their total victory in English politics, but at which point the rest of the world has now moved on. The US has no reason at all to indulge Johnson's fantasies. The cosmetic trade deal to make Brexit look clever is not a priority for Joe Biden. He's instead interested in rehabilitating the transatlantic alliance that Donald Trump vandalised, to which end Britain's insistence is that something other than Europe is unhelpful, economic vanity and geopolitical stupidity. Johnson has never been one for diplomacy, perhaps because it involves tact and relationships built on trust. His speeches rarely contain foreign policy or even references to other countries, except to caricature or metaphor them. As Saudi Arabia is to oil, the UK is to wind, he told last year's virtual Tory conference. It was only a glimpse of a world beyond British shores. The only reference to the EU was an actual false accusation that Labour is, quote, scheming to rejoin the bloc. There was also no mention of the US, China, Russia, India, or even Africa. Johnson's agenda is more parochial than he likes to imagine. He does not weigh trade deals in terms of jobs or growth, but as rhetorical props in the great Brexit showcase. So who will actually pay for the production of this is also an issue for later. For now, Global Britain is a performance put on for a domestic audience by a Prime Minister with his back turned to the real world. And that is exactly what we've been talking about for so long. This whole idea of this free trade that the Brexit free market fundamentalists love to talk about is, as we've said before, it's imperial nostalgia of a very, very bygone age. And the fact that you have Lord Frost, who somehow thinks that somehow we can sit beside the EU, Beijing and Washington as a creator of global standards, is completely lost on the plot. Britain is just not that powerful. It's just simply not. And yet, this is something that the Brexiteers believe, as we've always said right from the beginning. Brexit is a complete fantasy that is built on nothing. And because it's been built on nothing, there is nothing to support it. And it immediately falls to pieces. In fact, what we are going to see, I think, proceeding over the next couple of years, is we are going to see these quote-unquote fantastic trade deals, and then the public is actually going to come to learn the actual cost of these trade deals. And as soon as those trade deals and the cost of them actually start to affect the public, which might take, 5, maybe 10 years, we'll have to see, that is when people will start to think, well, actually, hang on, these deals aren't so fantastic. What's been going on? And that, ladies and gentlemen, will start us on the path back to rejoining the EU. Because people remember that time, those 40 years that we had, and think, actually, being part of the EU and actually having a say over trade deals and our regulations might actually be a good thing. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link as well called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.